Okay, so before we get into the participial phrase lesson, a few quick reminders. One, if you have not turned in your final draft research paper, please do so as soon as possible. If I have not received your final draft research paper yet, you will see that I have entered a 0 for it in Parent Connect. That will be amended with late credit taken as soon as you get your research paper to me. So the sooner you get it to me, the less late credit will be taken off on your final grade. So please make sure that you get that to me as soon as possible. Secondly, please be reminded that EBS is due on Monday, May 6th, which is 1 week from today. So make sure you're staying on top of that. Remember, you cannot take an EBS quiz today because I am gone, but make sure if you need an EBS quiz tomorrow when I return that you let me know. If you want a print quiz, you need to give me 1 day lead on that so that I can have it available for you in class the following day. So just make sure you're being aware of that. Okay, in terms of participial phrases, at this point, you all should have received these green packets from the sub, and the sub should have gone over with you the to-do list for today. So this obviously is the participial phrase lesson that I've posted for you on Classroom. I'm going to walk you through the basics of participial phrases, and we'll do a few of the practice sentences together. That will be the activity that's part of the green packet, okay? So this last page here that has the sentences on it, we most likely will not do all of these sentences together, but this is not the homework. The homework is actually the participial worksheets that are in the grammar packet that you already have. So hold on for just a second. All of you have the large packets that were given to you at the beginning of the unit. We have already done the prepositional phrase portions of this packet. So when I make reference to the homework assignment that's due for tomorrow, and it says that that is complete pages 63 and 64 in the previously distributed grammar packet, this is the packet I'm talking about. I am not talking about the activity in the green packet. Those are the practice sentences that we're going to do together to learn about participles and participles and participial phrases, okay? So we'll get to more on that later. If you could go ahead and turn to the note sheet in your packet, again, because I'm not here, I'm giving you a note sheet for participles. By the way, I did grade your prepositional phrase quizzes, and those are in Parent Connect. By and large, everyone did pretty well, so that is good. Hopefully we'll see similar success with participles. All right, so we are going into a section of phrases known as verbals. What does that mean? That means that these phrases are going to begin with words that look like verbs, but are not acting like verbs. So remember, that's one of the things that makes the English language very difficult. There's not lists where it's this is always a verb, this is always a noun, this is always an adjective. There are words that might do a different job in the sentence. So verbals, again, are words that look like they are verbs, they look like they are actions, but they're actually doing a different job in the sentence. So the first type of verbal that we're going to be talking about is a participle. And participles are used as adjectives. That's their only function, okay? So remember what we know about adjectives. Adjectives are extra. They are not necessary. You do not need them in the sentence to have the grammatical requirements for a complete sentence. So what does that mean? If you are trying to decide what word in the sentence is the participle, you need to make sure you're not taking out the main verb of the sentence. You're not looking at the main verb of the sentence. And we're going to talk more about that when we actually get to your practice sentences. Okay, so participles are verbs that act like adjectives. A participial phrase is going to start with a verb that has a very specific ending on it. So if you take a look at your note sheet and go all the way down to the last bullet point, it says there are two types of participles, the present participle and the past participle. The present participle ends in ing. So what that means is some participial phrases are going to start with a verb or action word that ends in ing. If you look at number 2, it says most past participles end in D, ed, or en. So if it is a past participle, it's going to start with an action word that ends in D, ED, or EN and is something that would have taken place in the past. So present, ing. Past, D, ED, or EN. Now, again, you want to be very careful that you're not confusing the participle in a sentence with the main verb of a sentence. So much like prepositional phrases, participles and participial phrases can come out, and the sentence should still make sense, and the sentence should still be grammatically correct. It should have a subject, it should have a verb, and it should express a complete thought, because adjectives are extra. They're not necessary. They're not needed, okay? So if you take a look at your second bullet point on your note sheet, remember that because it's acting as an adjective, it's going to answer all those same types of questions that adjectives answer. And so it's going to answer what kind, which one, how many, how much. And again, it's going to tell you something more about a noun or a pronoun in the sentence. So all of those same things that we learned about adjective phrases when we were talking about prepositional phrases are going to apply to participle phrases, okay? And then if you'll take a look at bullet point number 3, it says, because participles and participial phrases are verbals that function as an adjective, again, and I've said this before, but this is the biggest mistake students make with verbals, it is easy to confuse them with the verb or verb phrase of the sentence. Remember, participles and participial phrases act as a describer in a sentence. They do not indicate an action or serve to link the subject to something that describes it. So remember, verbs that link the subject to something that describe it are linking verbs, and those are your be verbs: is, are, was, were, be, being, been. Okay? So what's our takeaway on this? When you're looking for participles, you're going to look for a word that is an action. Then you're going to check to make sure that it has the correct endings that we know participles should have. ing, d, ed, en. Okay? So there's no real list because technically it could be pretty much any verb. So it's not like prepositions where you're going to have this list that you can look at. You just have to know, okay, it's an action word and it's going to have one of these types of endings to be a participle. Okay, that having been said, please turn to the practice activity. The practice activity directions state, underline the participial phrase in each of the following sentences, then draw an arrow from the phrase to the word that it modifies. At this point, we're not going to worry so much about drawing an arrow to the word that it modifies. However, with participles, it's easier because it's only going to be a noun or a pronoun. Remember, with prepositional phrases, depending on how that was working in the sentence, it could have been a noun, a pronoun, a verb, an adjective, an adverb. But with participial phrases, it's only going to be describing a noun or a pronoun, person, place, or thing. Okay? So I'm trying to determine if your activities ask you to identify the word being modified. Yes, they do. So we will eventually get to that in this tutorial, but let's take it one step at a time, just like we would do if I was actually here teaching this to you in the classroom. Okay, so take a look at number 1. Hoping to get rich, I have decided to become an investor. Now, based on what we know about participles, there are 2 options as to what it could be. It could be the word hoping, because that is a present participle, all right? It ends in ing. It's a verb that ends in ing. Or it could be decided, because that's a past tense verb ending in ed. Now you want to stop and ask yourself, what is the main idea or what is the main verb of this sentence? Who is doing what? Okay, in this situation, the main verb is have decided. I have decided to become an inventor. Okay, if you take the words have decided out, all you have left is hoping to get rich, I to become an inventor. Notice how when I take have decided out, the sentence does not make any sense anymore. Okay, so I'm trying to teach you all these same little tricks that I would teach you if I was actually here. So I tried to pull decided out and realized I can't pull it out. I have to leave it in. Okay, so that leaves us with the word hoping as our participle. So we're going to go ahead and circle that word. I know the directions don't tell you to do that, but in keeping with what we've done in the past, I'm going to tell you to go ahead and circle your special word, okay? So at this point, this is what yours should look like. Hopefully you can see that. I'm assuming you can. Yeah, hoping. Number one, you should circle hoping, okay? Now, the phrase is going to be anything that goes with that participle. But notice what you have in number one. You have a comma as a clue. If your sentence starts with a participle and there is a comma a couple of words later, generally speaking, your participial phrase is going to go from the participle until you hit the comma because it's being used as sort of an introductory phrase, okay? But in general, verbals can have all the same things associated with them as actual verbs do. They can take an object. They can have prepositional phrases that describe them, okay? And so we'll work through that a little bit with some of our other sentences. But for this first sentence, it's easier because we've got that comma to tell us where to stop. So we're going to go through hoping to get rich quick. Technically, to get rich quick is the object of the verbal hoping, okay? So again, this is what you should have done. You should have hoping circled and to get rich quick underlined. That is your participle and your participial phrase. Now, what you want to ask yourself in terms of deciding what word it's modifying or describing, you want to ask yourself who or what is hoping to get rich quick. Because remember, participles are going to describe people, places, or things, nouns or pronouns. So if you look back at your sentence and ask yourself who or what is hoping to get rich quick, the answer there obviously would be I. I am hoping to get rich quick. So you would draw an arrow from your participial phrase to the word I. Okay, just like that. Okay. Notice in number two, a friend of mine working with common materials claims to have invented a new kind of winter coat. Okay, based on what we know about participles, we have working, which ends in ing, and you have invented, which ends in ed. So let's try to take the ed one out. Why am I starting with that one first? Because notice you have commas as a clue again. You have the comma in front of the word working, and then you have another comma later. You should start to think anytime you have a sentence and you're looking for a participial phrase, if I see a comma, that could be a road sign directing my attention to where that phrase is located, okay? So let's try reading the sentence without your ed verb in there. A friend of mine working with common materials claims to have a new kind of winter coat. Now, technically, that seems like it should make sense, but remember, have and invented work together. They're a verb phrase. So you have to take both of them out to see if the sentence makes sense without them. So let's try reading that again. A friend of mine working with common materials claims to a new kind of winter coat. Clearly, we cannot take have invented out. Okay, so here's another thing too. Generally speaking, your participles are not going to have a helping verb in front of them. If they have some sort of helping verb in front of them, they are most likely the main verb of the sentence. They're probably not your participle. So if they have one of those be verbs, is, are, was, were, be, being, been in front of them, it's not going to be your participle. Generally speaking, I always say that because with the English language, there may be some sort of weird, wonky sentence floating around out there where that's going to prove me wrong. But this is one of those tricks that you can use to help you out, okay? So now we know invented is not our participle. Clearly, our participle is working. So we're going to go ahead and circle the word working, okay? Just like that. And then the rest of our phrase is going to be what is left between the two commas, okay? So we have working with common materials. Now, with common materials is a prepositional phrase describing working. Okay, it's telling you how you are working. You are working with common materials. All right. So again, what we want to do is we want to reread the sentence, because remember, as an adjective, whatever you have underlined should be able to come out of the sentence, and what you have left should still make sense and be a grammatically complete sentence without it. So if you read, a friend of mine claims to have invented a new kind of winter coat, that is a complete sentence. It does have a subject and verb, and it does make sense even with that participial phrase pulled out. All right. So then the next thing you want to do is ask yourself who or what was working with common materials. And in this case, your answer to that is going to be friend. The friend was working with common materials. All right. Okay, so let's take a look at number 3. This is an interesting one because it has a sort of non-standard participle. So let me remind you that present participles end in ing, past participles end in d, ed, en, or sometimes just an n. So I'm going to give you a hint on this one. You want to look for a verb word, something that you can do that ends with an n. All right. So as you're skimming your sentence, we're looking for any of those verb words that end with ing, ed, en, n. So we're skimming along, skimming along, skimming along. We're not really finding anything. And then we get to the word sown. Sown is your participle here. So we're going to go ahead and circle it. The remainder of your phrase is going to be anything that describes the word sown. So that means that the rest of your phrase is going to be all over the coat, because that explains where it was sown. Okay? So your whole participial phrase is sown all over the coat. And then to find the word that it's describing, you need to ask yourself who or what was sown all over the coat. So if we look at our sentence here, it says, as my friend explains, the secret is in the tiny plastic bottles sewn all over the coat. Weird sentence, I know. But what we see here is that what has been sewn all over the coat is bottles. So we would draw an arrow from that participial phrase to the word bottles. Okay? So just as a reminder, when you're picking the word that is being modified, you want to make sure that whatever you're drawing your arrow to is a person, place, or thing. Because remember that participles are adjectives and they describe nouns or pronouns. Okay, so if you are drawing an arrow to something, say you drew your arrow to explains, what you want to stop and ask yourself is that a person, place, or thing? Well, no, it's another action. So you know that that's not the word that it's describing. Notice also that generally speaking, your participial phrase is going to be relatively close to the word that it's describing. Now, the word could either be behind the phrase or it could be in front of the phrase, but it's still pretty close to the word that it's modifying. Look really quickly at sentence number 2, okay? Working with common materials. Notice that the word mine is actually the word closest to the participial phrase. You want to be careful because sometimes participial phrases will be separated from the words they're describing by a prepositional phrase, okay? So you really want to stop and ask yourself, is the word mine being modifying working with common materials? Because in that context, you would have to be talking about like a coal mine or some sort of place. But in this situation, that's not what's being expressed here. Mine is a describing word showing ownership. So that's how you know that working with common materials actually describes friend, not mine. So again, as always, slow down, Think it through, ask yourself the questions, don't rush to get an answer, okay? Let's try to do a couple more. What I'm going to ask you to do at this point is to pause the video, and I would like for you to do what we have just done with sentences 1, 2, and 3, with sentences 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video, stop, do what we just did for sentences 4, 5, and 6. When you're done, hit play on the video again, and I'll go over those sentences with you. Okay, so let's take a look at number 4. Our first thing is going to be to skim the sentence and look for a verb word that ends in ing, ed, d, en, or n. So we notice immediately that the very first word of the sentence is an action word that ends in ed. As we continue to skim, we notice that a couple of words later, there's a comma. That should tell us, this has got a lot of road signs telling me that this could be a participial phrase, but I'm going to keep looking through the end of the sentence just to be on the safe side. So as I continue to look on, I do not see any other verb words that have the endings that I need for it to be a participle. That tells me that filled is going to be my participle. So I'm going to go ahead and circle the word filled. Now, because we have our comma to help us, we know that that phrase is going to go from the word filled to the word water, and it's going to stop there. With water is a prepositional phrase describing the word filled. So now what we want to ask ourselves is, what or who was filled with water? So as we read the rest of the sentence, we see that what was filled with water was the bottles. So we're going to draw an arrow from filled with water to the word bottles. Everybody with me? How'd you do? Hopefully good. Okay. Let's take a look at number 5. Again, I would strongly suggest that the first thing you do is sort of skim that sentence for commas, because we know with participial phrases, a lot of them are going to be offset by commas. Immediately we see that there's a big chunk of the sentence right in the middle that's got a comma in front of it and a comma behind it. We also notice that the word right after the first comma is a verb word with an ed ending. So that should automatically set off a red flag in our mind saying that could very well be my participle, but I want to check to make sure. So I'm going to look at all the words that are not inside the commas. So I'm skimming, and I see that there are no other potential participles in the rest of the sentence because there are no verb words that end with d, ed, en, or n. So we know that asked has to be our participle. So I'm going to go ahead and circle that. Now we also have commas to help us to know how far we need to extend that phrase. Remember, if it's offset by commas, you're going to start with your participle and you're pretty much going to go until you hit that comma. Now, again, like every other trick I teach you, that is not going to be 100% of the time. Occasionally, you're going to have a sentence that you can't use that trick with, but this particular sentence you can. So our participial phrase is going to be asked about the effectiveness of the solar coat. Now, let me walk you through what's going on in the rest of this phrase. About the effectiveness modifies the word asked. It tells something more specific about the word asked. Why did you ask? Or for what purpose did you ask? Or about what did you ask? About the effectiveness of okay? And then of the solar coat is going to modify effectiveness. So remember that your phrase is going to include your participle, any phrases or words that describe your participle, and anything that goes with those describing things of the participle. So notice you've got 2 prepositional phrases, one modifying the participle and one modifying the object of that preposition in front of it, okay, which I know seems super complicated, which is really lucky as to why we have those commas, okay? So, yep, there's a lot going on there, but thankfully we've got those commas as our clues to help us to know when to start it and when to end it, okay? Doing okay? All right, let's take a look at number 6. So we're going to skim the whole sentence here. No commas. Remember when we were doing essential and non-essential clauses, and we knew that if a clause was essential, that you did not offset it by commas because it needed to stay in the sentence to make the meaning clear. And then you had non-essential clauses that were set off by commas. Participles are going to be the same way. They're not always going to be surrounded by commas because for some reason that participle may be needed, not grammatically, but in order to make your meaning clear. So now we know we don't have commas to help us in this sentence. So if you take a look, you've got 2 options here, okay? You've got the word powered and you've got the word seemed. This one's going to be trickier because here you have to ask yourself what the main idea of the sentence is. What is actually the action of the sentence and not a describing word of the sentence? Okay, in this case, your participle is the word powered because it's modifying the word flashlight. It's telling how that flashlight or what kind of flashlight you're using. You're using a flashlight that is powered by the sun as opposed to a flashlight that is powered by a battery, okay? So you're going to go ahead and circle the word powered like you did here. Oops, sorry. And then you're going to underline by the sun, okay? Because by the sun modifies the word powered. It tells how it's powered by the sun. Powered by the sun tells you what kind of flashlight. It's a flashlight powered by the sun as opposed to a flashlight powered by a battery, okay? So you're going to go ahead and draw your line or your arrow to flashlight. Okay, we are not going to do 7, 8, and 10 because I'm going to show you in number 7, your sentence starts with the word excited, and then a couple of words later, you have a comma. So that should let you know, I think excited is my participle, and it's going to extend until I hit that comma. Number 8 starts with an ing verb, taking. And then if you look several words later, you have a comma. So that should kind of be a clue to you, okay, I think taking is my participle, and it's going to extend to until I hit the comma. Same thing for number 10. All right, pointing out the uselessness of a flashlight in the sunshine, comma. Pointing is a participle, ending in ing. That's going to begin it, and it's going to go all the way to your comma. All right. However, though, let's take a look at number 9. Okay. So for number 9, we're going to look for the word that has our ending that we need. We're going to look for an ing verb. We're going to look for an ed verb. We're going to look for a d verb and or an N or an EN verb, okay? So we're going to skim along, skim along, skim along, and the only word in this sentence that meets that criteria, verb word ending in D, ED, N, EN, or ING, is seated, all right? So we're going to go ahead and circle the word seated. Now, to extend the phrase, we need to look for anything that describes the word seated or anything that describes something that's describing seated. So if you look directly after it, you have the prepositional phrase at my work table. That says where you are seated. So you're going to go ahead and underline that. Now, the next thing you want to ask yourself is deep in thought, okay? Thinking deeply, somebody giving a lot of thought to something. Can deep in thought describe the word table? Can a table be deep in thought? No, really a table cannot be deep in thought, okay? Can the word deep in thought describe the word seated? Like how you are seated. Are you seated in a state of deep contemplation? Are you seated in a state of being deep in thought? Maybe that's kind of a stretch there. I'm not sure about that. Could you say, my friends found me deep in thought? Yes. It's not saying where they found you, but it's the state that you are in. Deep in thought actually describes me. It describes my state or condition while I'm being seated at the table. So we're going to stop that participial phrase right there, seated at my work table. Seated at my work table describes me, as does deep in thought. So for that sentence, you really should only have at my work table underlined. Sorry, I'm not doing a good job of showing you this. Of course, you can look at it on your own. So you've got seated at my work table. Seated describes me. Deep in thought's also going to describe me. Okay. All right, hopefully that helps. Hopefully this will give you what you need in order to do the homework. And this is something that you can come back to as we're doing participles, or even to review for the quiz. You could review this video and kind of work through a couple of the sentences and help you to review for the quiz. The quiz will be Wednesday. Tomorrow we'll go over the homework assignment and you'll have a chance to ask me any questions in person, hopefully. I mean, I guess there's always the possibility I'd be gone for jury duty again. Hopefully that won't be the case. So remember that your actual homework for tomorrow is going to be to do pages 63 and 64 in this grammar packet. And I want you to do all of both pages. I know for the previous ones, you only did exercise A. For these, I want you to do all of the worksheets, okay? But notice for the first one, for participles, you're not doing the phrases, you're just circling the participle or underlining the participle and then circling the word that's being described. So on page 63, if you want to take your worksheet packet out again, if you've tucked that aside, if you look at the example, notice that the word thrashing is your participle and it's describing the word winds. So remember, participles can work by themselves. You can just have a single participle describing a word. Generally speaking, that's going to be right in front of the word it's describing. Or you can have a participial phrase that's describing a word, which could either be before or after the word it's describing. For participles, you're just finding the participle and finding the word being described. For the second one, you're working with phrases like what we just did. Okay, you're finding the phrase, just like what we did. Okay, and again, actually, no, they actually underlined it for you in the first one, and then you're just identifying the word being modified. So that you lucked out on that one. So and then in the second one, you actually have to find the phrase. So in exercise A, you're just finding the word being modified, and then in exercise B, you're actually finding the phrase and the word modified. Okay, so you got a little bit of a break on that one. All right, good luck. If you have any questions, go ahead and shoot me an email. When you're done with the homework, that's time for you to be working on EBS. Again, please be reminded not to ask the sub for an EBS quiz because that person has been instructed not to give you one in my absence. All right, good luck. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow.